There is a moment in everyone's life when familiar ideas about the world begin to loosen, almost like the threads of an old garment finally giving way to the weight of time. It rarely begins with a dramatic sign. More often it arrives quietly, through a question you can't ignore, a dream that lingers longer than it should, or a sense that something inside you is whispering truths you've forgotten how to hear. That gentle unraveling is where our story opens, with a figure named Laurian, someone who has spent years searching outside himself for answers that were waiting patiently within. Laurian grew up believing the divine existed somewhere, up there, distant and unreachable unless filtered through rituals, buildings, or someone granted more authority than him. He respected what he was taught, but he carried a quiet ache he could never explain. Whenever he closed his eyes, he felt something stirring at the center of his being, an instinct, a presence, a tiny spark of awareness glowing behind the noise of his thoughts. He didn't have a name for it, but it felt like an eye watching from within, a lantern glimpsed through layers of fog. One evening, while resting in the dim light of his room, that unknown spark pulsed brighter. It didn't feel supernatural, nor was it dramatic. It simply felt like truth. As he settled into that feeling, he sensed an inner doorway opening, not made of wood or stone, but of perception. Slowly, carefully, he followed the sensation deeper, discovering that the single eye, spoken of in old teachings, wasn't a poetic metaphor at all, but a real form of inward seeing that illuminated the spaces beneath his thoughts. He focused on the subtle warmth between his brows, just above the bridge of his nose, the region traditions call the seat of the inner lamp. As he breathed, the warmth expanded, soft and comforting, almost like a sunrise hidden behind his forehead. Something in him recognized this light instinctively, as if he had always known it but had simply forgotten. This was not the cold, distant deity he had imagined in childhood. This was an intimate presence, immediate and alive, dwelling quietly inside him like an ancient friend who had always been there. As this inner glow stabilized, Laurian became aware of a deep stillness flooding his body. The chatter in his mind softened. The tension in his muscles loosened. The world outside seemed to fade into the background while an enormous sense of spaciousness opened inside his chest. He realized, with a kind of awe, that he was not entering a new place, he was returning to one. The living temple he had read about in mystical writings was not symbolic after all. It was his own body, his own consciousness, built to house the divine spark like the holiest sanctuary. He let the realization settle. Every pulse of his heart felt like a drum echoing through the walls of that inner temple. Every breath seemed to fan the flame of the inner lamp, brightening the space behind his closed eyes. Instead of feeling small in the presence of something vast, he felt deeply connected to it, as if the boundary between seeker and source had briefly dissolved. The divine wasn't above him. It wasn't separate from him. It was the very light that allowed him to see. With that recognition came images, not visions in the literal sense, but impressions unfolding in his mind. He saw the human body as a cathedral of living energy, each cell shimmering like golden stained glass, each nerve a thread of luminous filament. At the center of this vast architecture sat a tiny but powerful lantern, the pineal lamp, the single eye, the inner lamp that lights the whole body. It burned with a radiance that didn't blind, but revealed. It showed him depths of himself he had neglected, forgotten, or misunderstood. In its glow, he saw that the temple had never been abandoned. It had always been waiting for him to step inside with awareness. He understood something else too. This was not a new teaching. It was ancient, carried across cultures and eras by those who had glimpsed the same light. But somewhere along the journey of human history, this knowledge had slowly slipped from everyday understanding. People learned to look outward for guidance rather than inward for illumination. They built monuments of stone while forgetting the sacred architecture of their own consciousness. And yet, the inner lamp never disappeared. It simply waited in silence for anyone willing to look. Laurian spent what felt like hours exploring this newfound awareness. He wasn't trying to analyze it or turn it into doctrine. He was simply experiencing it, allowing the soft radiance of the inner lamp to guide his attention through the chambers of his inner world. With each gentle observation, he felt more and more like a participant rather than an observer of his own spiritual existence. The divine spark was not a guest inside the body, it was the host, the light that gave life its very meaning. Eventually, he opened his eyes. The physical room around him looked the same, soft shadows on the walls, warm light filtering through the curtains, but he was not the same. Something inside him had shifted with quiet certainty. The world felt less heavy, as if a great weight he didn't know he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. He felt more grounded, more present, and yet more expansive than he ever had before. He didn't rush to explain what happened, nor did he feel the need to classify it. He simply allowed the experience to rest in him, like embers glowing beneath the surface. He sensed that this was only the beginning of a journey, one that would lead him through forgotten traditions, hidden teachings, and layers of truth buried beneath centuries of misunderstanding. But for now, it was enough to know that the inner lamp existed, and that it could be awakened. As he stood up and walked across the room, he felt a quiet smile forming without effort. The temple within him had opened its doors, and the single eye had begun to see. The days that followed wrapped themselves around Laurian like a slow-moving veil. Everywhere he went, he sensed that inner lamp flickering quietly, as if reminding him that the journey toward clarity wasn't a destination but an unfolding. And with every gentle pulse of awareness, he felt more compelled to understand why something so simple, so universally accessible, had been hidden from ordinary people for so long. The question lingered like a subtle ache: if the divine lives within us, why have we been taught to search everywhere else? That question echoed louder each night as he read through old writings, dusty translations, and fragments of suppressed teachings left behind by early mystics. Again and again, he found the same message, sometimes whispered, sometimes wrapped in metaphors to avoid punishment. They all pointed inward. They spoke of the kingdom within, the inner light, the single eye, the temple made of living flesh rather than stone. Yet these voices had been buried, fragmented, or dismissed as heresy. One evening, Laurian sat in the glow of a small lamp, the pages of a cracked manuscript spread before him. It recounted how early followers of the inner path, the ones later labeled Gnostics, had insisted that every human carried a spark of the divine. They believed knowledge didn't descend from a hierarchy, but rose from inner seeing. And that frightened those who built power upon obedience. If every person possessed direct access to truth, then no outer authority could claim to stand between humans and the divine. Laurian leaned back, feeling the quiet shock of recognition. It wasn't that the message had been lost by accident. It had been managed, redirected, shaped into something controllable. Structures grew around teachings like vines twisting around an old statue, obscuring its features while pretending to protect it. Words were rewritten, contexts altered, metaphors transformed into literal commandments. People forgot that stories meant to guide them inward had been repurposed to keep them dependent on an outside force. He imagined generations of seekers waiting for answers that never came because no one told them the light they prayed to was already shining behind their own eyes. He imagined the quiet grief of forgotten teachers, those who tried to keep the ancient message alive only to watch their words be mistranslated, diluted, and sometimes erased entirely. The weight of that history settled into him, not as sadness, but as a fierce calm, the kind that grows when truth finally begins to align with intuition. The more he studied, the more clearly he sensed a pattern. Empires and institutions had always feared what they could not control. When a person awakens to inner sovereignty, they become harder to manipulate. They stop seeking permission to exist. They stop relying on intermediaries to experience the sacred. They listen to an authority deeper than any earthly voice. And that kind of freedom, quiet and unshakable, can unravel entire systems of power. Laurian wasn't angry as he pieced this together. If anything, he felt compassion, because it wasn't simply malice that built those systems. It was fear. Fear of chaos, fear of losing influence, fear that ordinary people, if awakened to their inner light, might reshape the world in ways unpredictable to those who live by control. But fear, he realized, never needed to be the author of the human story. The inner lamp could rewrite everything. He closed the manuscript and let the silence settle. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of night air. It felt like an invitation to step outside, so he walked into the cool darkness. The city around him hummed with distant traffic and scattered lights, each window glowing like a tiny star. He wondered how many of those lights belonged to people who felt the same quiet ache he once carried, people sensing something within but lacking the language or permission to explore it. He paused on a quiet street corner, breathing slowly. The inner lamp pulsed. And for a brief moment, the world around him shifted, not visually, but perceptually. The separation between buildings, sky, and flesh grew thinner. Everything felt woven together by an invisible thread, a shared luminosity hidden beneath form. This is what they didn't want people to discover, he thought. That the divine isn't distant. It's the light braided through every moment, every heartbeat, every breath. As he continued walking, he thought of countless traditions that had encoded the same truth. The seed of God in every soul. The inward kingdom. The eye that fills the body with light. In different cultures and eras, the expressions varied, but the essence remained the same: awakening comes from within. It was only the structures around these teachings that shifted, bending them into shapes that served their own survival rather than human liberation. Laurian recognized he wasn't the first to rediscover this. Many before him had stumbled into the inner temple, only to find themselves misunderstood or silenced. Yet the message always resurfaced, carried by poets, mystics, rebels, healers, anyone willing to trust the quiet guidance of the inner lamp. It survived because it was written into the architecture of the human spirit. Because truth, even when buried, grows roots and finds its way back into the world. He reached a small park and sat on a weathered bench beneath a sprawling tree. Moonlight filtered through the branches in soft beams, illuminating the ground in shifting patterns. It reminded him of the diagrams he had seen of the nervous system, branches of light running through the human form, carrying signals that connected every part to the whole. It was a mirror of the cosmos above and the inner cosmos within. In that moment, he felt a deep understanding settle into him. The suppression of inner knowledge had shaped civilizations, influenced belief systems, and molded cultures. But it had never been fully successful. The lamp kept burning, quietly, stubbornly, in every person willing to go inward. And now, in this gentle moment of clarity, he sensed that the world was shifting again. More and more people were beginning to remember, to question, to listen inwardly. He could feel it in conversations, in books resurfacing from obscurity, in art hinting at forgotten symbolism, in the restless longing people carried as they searched for meaning beyond the surface of their lives. Something was awakening collectively, not just individually. And he knew that the work ahead was not to expose darkness, but to illuminate the path back to the inner lamp that had never left. As he rose from the bench and walked home,
the truth accompanied him like a companion. The old systems had done their best to bury the kingdom within, but they had only succeeded in delaying it. The inner lamp was stirring in countless hearts, ready to be understood again. And Laurian knew his own awakening was just a small part of a much larger unfolding. By the time Laurian reached the end of his long inner questioning, something inside him had settled into an almost luminous steadiness. Not a dramatic enlightenment, not a thunderclap of revelation, just a quiet, undeniable shift in the center of his being, like the turning of a great wheel that had been waiting for years to move. And as the inner lamp grew clearer each day, a new feeling emerged from its glow: readiness. Not to preach, not to convert, but simply to live from a place he had only recently remembered existed.
Late one afternoon, while resting in the gentle hush of his room, Laurian felt an impulse to close his eyes again. He wasn't seeking anything specific. It was simply the natural movement of awareness returning home, like a tide easing back toward the deeper waters. As he breathed, he noticed the subtle warmth behind his brow intensify, not burning, not overwhelming, just quietly radiant. The inner lamp flickered once, twice, and then steadied itself into a warm, expansive glow. As the sensation deepened, it began to spread through his body in soft waves. His chest loosened. His hands tingled. His spine felt lighter, as if a current of energy was gently spiraling upward within him, harmonizing the spaces that once felt tense or neglected. It wasn't mystical in the theatrical sense. It was tender, like someone had placed a small sun inside him and it was just beginning to rise. In that soft, luminous silence, he realized something he had been circling around for weeks: awakening wasn't a destination. It wasn't an achievement. It was a remembering, an inner homecoming that unfolded little by little, breath by breath. The second coming, spoken of in ancient stories, wasn't an event crashing into the world from the sky. It was the return of inner light within ordinary people, one awakening at a time, until the collective glow became impossible to ignore. He saw it clearly: every time a person turned inward and touched the lamp within, the world brightened, subtly, quietly, but undeniably. And if enough people remembered that inner flame, if enough hearts opened to the kingdom within, the entire shape of human life could shift. Not through force or upheaval, but through illumination. That realization bloomed inside him with the softness of a rising dawn. For years he had carried quiet frustration about the state of the world, the confusion, the division, the endless search for meaning in places that only deepened longing. But now he saw those struggles differently. People weren't lost because they lacked goodness. They were lost because they had forgotten their own light. The inner lamp wasn't a spiritual luxury reserved for mystics, it was a birthright, a built-in compass pointing every human being back to their origin. And when it lit up, even faintly, it changed how a person saw everything. Judgments softened. Fear loosened. The craving to control or be controlled weakened. A kind of inner honesty emerged, gentle, but powerful. As he sat with this realization, something else rose in him, a desire to help others recognize the same light. Not through instruction, not through doctrine, but simply by describing what he had experienced in the clearest, calmest way possible. If his words could nudge even one person toward their own inner lamp, the effort would be worthwhile. He opened his eyes and let the room slowly come back into focus. The shadows on the wall, the texture of the wooden desk, the soft hum of distant traffic, they all felt different now, as if infused with a meaning that reached deeper than form. Every object seemed to hold a quiet shimmer, a reminder that the material world was not separate from the inner light but shaped by the same luminous essence, expressed differently. That evening, he walked outside again. This time he wasn't analyzing or questioning, he was simply observing. The sky had begun to shift into that soft, amber dusk where the day exhales and the night inhales. The colors blended like watercolor on silk, gentle violets, slow-moving gold, dimming blues. As he watched the light fade, he noticed how calm everything felt. Even the breeze moved with a kind of mindful grace, brushing past his skin as if acknowledging the presence of the lamp within him. He walked toward a small clearing near the edge of the park, where the grass opened into a quiet field. It was empty except for a few scattered leaves and a single bench worn by time. Laurian sat and let the stillness gather around him. In that moment, he sensed that the world was full of people sitting in similar silence, people on the edge of awakening, people sensing the faint glow inside but not yet trusting it. He imagined someone watching the sunset right now with a longing they couldn't name, feeling the subtle nudge that something within them was waiting. He imagined someone else lying awake at night, staring at a dark ceiling and wondering why life felt incomplete even when everything looked fine on the outside. He imagined someone standing in a crowd, feeling alone, yet unable to understand that the loneliness came not from others but from their separation from their own inner lamp. He felt compassion for them, not pity, but recognition. Because he had been all of them at one point. He understood the quiet ache they carried. And he knew that awakening didn't require special skills or spiritual training. It required only a moment of stillness, a willingness to turn inward, and the courage to listen to the faint hum of the lamp within. A slow breath escaped his lips as he realized the next step of his journey wasn't about seeking deeper mysteries. It was about embodying the light he had found. Living from it. Allowing it to guide his words, his choices, his presence. Letting it soften the sharp edges of daily life, brighten the dim corners of habit, and expand into the world through simple acts of clarity and compassion. The inner lamp didn't want followers. It didn't demand rituals. It simply wanted to be recognized. And once recognized, it began to awaken others through the authenticity of those who carried it. As night settled and the first stars flickered into the sky, Laurian felt an anchoring peace wash over him. He understood that the journey inward would continue for the rest of his life, not as a struggle, but as a deepening. A widening of perception. A remembering that repeated itself in layers, each unveiling another facet of the same gentle truth. He stood, breathed in the cool night air, and walked home with the quiet assurance that the light within him was not his alone. It was humanity's shared inheritance, waiting to be reawakened one person at a time. And as he stepped through the doorway of his home, he felt the inner lamp glow just a little brighter. If you've walked with Laurian through this quiet inner journey, then you've also traced the outline of your own. His path is not meant to be admired from a distance, it's a mirror, a soft reminder that beneath all the noise, complication, and inherited beliefs, there is a place in you that has never dimmed. The inner lamp he discovered is not exclusive. It is not rare. It is not reserved for a chosen few. It is the very pulse of consciousness, the spark that has been gently tapping at the edges of your awareness since you were young. Every breath you've taken has carried you closer to it. Every moment of stillness, every flicker of intuition, every unexplainable sense of connection has been the lamp calling you home. The systems that tried to bury this truth were large, but the light within you is larger. It outlasts misunderstanding. It outshines fear. And once you recognize even a hint of its glow, you begin to sense how genuinely sacred your inner world is. You don't have to rush toward awakening. You don't have to force anything open. Just soften. Just listen. Just breathe into the center of your being and trust that something ancient, patient, and loving is already waiting there. The second coming, the resurrection of inner knowing, the return of the luminous presence, all of it unfolds inside you, quietly and naturally, when you allow the lamp to shine. If this journey stirred something in you, even a small spark, then stay connected with this space. There are many more paths to explore together. Before you go, if this video brought value or clarity to your day, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next chapter. Click like if the message resonated, and share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder of their own inner light.